Hi, my name is Nathan Florsheim, and I am a photo and video instructor at the Evanston Art Center. Thanks to the Phillip and Edith Leonian Foundation, we are able to present you with a series of video tutorials to help you with your photography process at home. Now that we've gone over how to edit our raw files in Photoshop's Camera Raw editor, we will be going over some of the basic editing tools in Photoshop itself. Some of these may be a little bit redundant in that we achieved some of them in Camera Raw, but for the sake of the video, I want to show how you can do it in both Camera Raw and Photoshop. The first thing that I often do in my Photoshop editing process is I will crop my image if I haven't already cropped it in RAW, or if I decide that I want to crop it differently. You can go to the crop tool on the toolbar on the left, and similarly to Camera Raw, it'll pop up and you can hold the edges or these little brackets, click and drag to adjust the size. You can also adjust the ratio, so you could have it locked to something like a square, or you could have it be the original, or have it be totally unconstrained and free. To use it unconstrained, hit the clear option up near where the ratios are. This will allow you to edit and adjust it however you want. One thing that can happen in Photoshop's crop tool is you could accidentally go outside the bounds of the image, and if you confirm it, it will include that white space. So while you're cropping, if you ever have something weird happen and you don't really know, a good way to just make sure nothing wrong happens is you hit the little backwards arrow or the little stop symbol next to the check mark, and that will undo all the cropping that you currently have open. If you hover your cursor outside of the crop tool, you can also use it to rotate or straighten your image when it turns into the little curved arrow symbol. This is great for lining up horizon lines, or if you're shooting something in the city and you want the buildings to be nice and straight. If you do confirm a crop, or really anything in the editing process, and you decide that you don't like it and you want to go backwards, to go backwards just a single step, you can do Command Z on your keyboard, or if you go up to your Window tab and select History, it'll include a menu of all the steps that you've done in your editing process. So typically I have that history window open, especially if I'm doing pretty in-depth edits, so I can go back and know exactly where I'm going back. Once you're done cropping, I always like to go back to my cursor tool or the move tool and get out of the crop tool. That is the top tool on the toolbar, or you can use the keyboard shortcut of V. I like to make sure I'm on this whenever I open up Photoshop, or I look and double check every so often while I'm editing to make sure I'm not on some editing tool that'll do something weird and get me lost. Now that we've made a change to our original image, I like to make sure that I'm saving it at this point. And instead of just saving it and overwriting over the original file, I like to save it as a copy. That way we always have the original unedited version left untouched, and we have a working version that we can continue to update. To do this, we will go up to File and select Save As. And this window will pop up where we can tell the computer where we want to save our file, what we want to name it, if we want to create a new folder, and what file type. If your window looks differently than mine, if you see where it says Fuji Edits and there's a little upward facing arrow to the right of it, yours may be facing down, and if you click that, it'll expand the menu to show you all the different options that we will need. The first thing that I'm going to do is create a new folder for my Photoshop edits by selecting New Folder, and I name it Fuji Edits. And then from here, I can make sure that my format is Photoshop. Sometimes it'll update it automatically, but every so often it seems to not remember, and so you really want to make sure that it says Photoshop before hitting save. And then at the top of the window, you can rename the file if you'd like. Just make sure to keep the extension in the name, which is the .psd in this case. Go ahead and click save, and now this edited version of your file will live in that Fuji Edits folder, and you can continue to update it as you go by just hitting Command S. You would only need to do File Save As again if you want to save yet another copy of your image if you make a really drastic change, which we'll go over in a little bit. Next, we are going to use my favorite and probably most used tool in Photoshop, which is called Curves. Curves is what I like to use to adjust the brightness, darkness, and contrast in my image. It's located in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen in your Adjustment Layers menu. This menu, when you click on any of the tools, will create a new layer above your image layer, which you can see is titled Background. I prefer using these because you can always remove and go backwards when you have an adjustment layer. Nothing is permanent. Curves allows you to edit your image based on its histogram, which is a graphic representation of light in your image. You can add points and move them up or down across this line, and that will adjust the brightness or darkness of the image. The bottom left-hand corner of the window represents the darkest point of your image, and the top right-hand corner represents the brightest part of your image. If you move the line down, it'll make the image darker, and if you move it up, it'll make it brighter. So if you add a dot in the middle and move it up or down, it will do a general adjustment to the entire image because you're selecting the midtones, and that in turn adjusts the entire line when there's only one dot. You can easily toggle between seeing the edits and the original image by going down to where you see the layers themselves and clicking on the eyeball next to your curves layer. When there is an eyeball there, you're seeing the edits live, and if you remove it, it'll show you just the layers underneath it. To remove a point on the line, you can just click it and hit the delete key, or you can click and hold and drag it off the edge of the window, and that will automatically remove it as well. So if you want to do more specific adjustments with the curves tool, you can add multiple points across the line. So rather than just sticking with one, if I add one in the bottom third and the top third area of the image, this will anchor in some areas that are darker and some areas that are brighter in the image, and you can move them independently of one another. So the top right dot will be adjusting the brighter areas, while the bottom left dot will be adjusting the darker areas. I typically do pretty subtle changes with curves just to bring out the best in each image, as I aim to make sure that it is exposed properly to begin with. Another reason is when you start to make really major adjustments with curves, it's easy to go overboard and start having a lot of distortion occur in your image, and it kind of starts to destroy the digital file itself. It can result in some pretty cool looks, but it's typically not what I'm going for when I'm using curves. If you do end up actually making some crazy edits to it and you want to go back and you don't know exactly which point is doing it and you just want a fresh start, you can hit the little back arrow on the bottom of the curves window and that'll reset everything and you can start fresh. I recommend spending some time just playing around with this editing tool and getting familiar with it, as it's something I use very frequently. Once you're done with your edits in the curves tool, you can minimize the window by clicking the arrows in the upper right hand corner of the little pop-up. To bring it back, you can double click the icon on the curves layer itself, or you can just click on the adjustments layer tool on the bar on the right hand side of the screen here. Next, we'll go over how to do some basic color adjustments in Photoshop. You're going to go back to that adjustments layer menu where you got the curves from, and you're going to choose on hue and saturation. We're going to ignore that bottom lightness slider, as we can darken or brighten our image using curves better than that little slider can. The saturation slider will increase or decrease the color strength of the image in general, and the hue slider will actually change the colors themselves. I typically just use the saturation slider to make some slight adjustments to the color strength in the image. If you do want to make your image black and white, go back down to your adjustment layer panel and you will add a black and white layer. The reason I prefer this tool is it gives you a lot more control over the contrast and depth of image. It does this because when you convert a color image to black and white, all the colors change to varying shades of gray. And with this tool, you can select each color, like red, yellow, blue, or green, and adjust how bright or how dark it is in that image. You can do that with the sliders here, or click this little hand tool and just click on a specific area of your image, hold down and drag to the left or the right, and it will then do that adjustment for the color in that particular area. This allows you to have a lot of contrast and depth in ways that the hue and saturation layer just doesn't allow. Typically when I use that, it is a pretty flat gray black and white image, whereas with this you can get some really, really nice contrast between the blacks, the highlights, and everything in between. For example, I'm going to quickly show you what it looks like when you just make an image black and white with hue and saturation and compare it to when it's using the black and white layer. This is what it looks like when you use hue and saturation and the black and white layer is disabled. And this is what it looks like when you enable the black and white layer. So you can see there's a lot more depth and contrast. And especially when you spend a lot of time with this tool, you can get it looking really, really great. To delete a layer that you don't need anymore, you can click on it to highlight it and just hit the delete key on your keyboard. Making your image black and white is a good example of when you should do File Save As again. You're going to do the same process as before, but instead of making a new folder, you can just save it in that same edits folder that you created last time. And I just like to add BW or something to indicate the change to the file at the end of the file name. That does it for this video on Photoshop editing basics. When you're done with your image, you can either close out of the individual image by going where you see the file name and clicking the little gray X, or you can quit out of Photoshop entirely by going Command Q or hitting the red circle on the top left-hand corner of the screen. Once again, we would like to thank the Phillip and Edith Leonian Foundation for providing the funding to make these videos possible. Stay tuned for more videos covering Photoshop, other editing softwares, and camera tips and tricks. Thanks.